The two explosions that tore through the Boston Marathon nearly a year ago were like a starting gun on a second race against time. Unknown terrorists were on the loose, and they had more bombs. Now, for the first time, you're going to hear the inside story from the federal investigators who ran the Manhunt. They led a task force of more than 1,000 federal agents, state police, and Boston cops. Tonight, they will speak of the disturbing evidence that cracked the case and of a debate among the investigators that ultimately led to the dragnet's violent end. The afternoon of April 15th, the FBI's man in charge of Boston got a text: 2 large explosions near the finish line. For Special Agent Rick DeLaurier, the marathon became a sprint to catch the killers before they struck again.
I felt that week that I had the weight of the world on my shoulders, and I'm sure I wasn't the only one.
Did you feel if there was a third bombing, it would be on you?
That's everybody's fear. It would be on me. It would be on the Joint Terrorism Task Force. But that wasn't what drove us. What drove us is preventing more people from getting hurt.
264 were hurt already, 3 killed. Moments before, Rick DeLaurier had been counting the days to retirement, 26 years at the FBI. Now, on Boylston Street, he took over the biggest investigation of his life.
It was a scene of devastation. There was evidence everywhere.
And you said what to yourself in that moment?
I said, we will find those responsible for these despicable crimes.
FBI Director Robert Mueller ordered every office in the world to back up DeLaurier. DeLaurier's link to headquarters was Executive Assistant Director Stephanie Douglas.
We were very, very concerned about other bombs in Boston, but we had to think beyond that. Were there other bombs in other cities? Were U.S. interests even abroad at risk? So we had to consider everything. We could not eliminate anything.
First came the crime scene. 12 blocks of debris, abandoned backpacks, and bomb parts blown to smithereens.
They set up a grid pattern. Evidence could be on windowsills. Evidence could be on roofs of buildings. Evidence could be anywhere.
Are they going down the street with tweezers?
Sometimes, when they need to, they're doing that. But yes, they're very carefully picking up everything they see.
They saw a battery pack for model cars and chunks of 2 pressure cookers. The cookers concentrate the explosion for maximum force.
You decided to set up a warehouse near Logan Airport.
Right.
Everything swept from the street was processed in this 46,000 square foot warehouse. Twice a day, a plane flew the items to the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia.
And you basically have almost like an assembly line of evidence. So it gets tagged, it gets recorded as evidence so that you're preserving that chain of custody. But it also, for all the different parts and components that would later go to recreating the devices themselves.
The bombs?
Yes.
Recreating the bombs?
Yes.
From the pieces that you found?
Yes.
Successful as that was, it turned out the evidence that would solve the case had been collected before the first bomb exploded that Monday. The FBI could travel back in time through the lenses of dozens of security cameras up and down Boylston.
Almost 13,000 different videos were obtained, and 120,000, actually more than 120,000 still photographs.
At the FBI lab in Virginia, 120 analysts were searching video feeds from Boston.
What are you looking for?
Somebody who just doesn't look similar to others in a crowd who would be watching a race.
Was there a eureka moment in terms of the video? At some point somebody said, hey boss, have a look at this.
Yes, there was. It was, I believe, a Wednesday morning, and we watched that video hundreds and hundreds of times.
You can see an individual, a tall man wearing a white ball cap, walk into the frame. He has a backpack slung over one of his shoulders. He puts the backpack down very nonchalantly. He joins the crowd. You clearly see everybody look very, very definitely to the left, like they've heard something, they've seen something, so you know that first blast has gone off. He does not do that. He does not do what everybody else in that video does. He does not turn to his left. He instead just stands there for a second or two and walks very deliberately back the same direction that he came in.
The Eureka video hasn't been seen by the public. It is being kept for the trial. But this still photo shows much the same view of the suspect and the people who would be torn apart by the blast.
Let me ask you to describe what you see in that picture.
I see the subject, the individual who has been charged in the investigation, and I see people who were grievously injured in that blast, and I see individuals who died in that blast.
The people along the fence line there.
Several of them, yes. Very, very emotional time when I look at that, to know what happened a few moments afterwards.
I believe I see his backpack on the ground, and then I see one of the people that was killed as a result of that bomb.
Do you know their name?
This is Martin Richard.
Martin Richard was 8 years old. His 7-year-old sister Jane lost a leg. Their father Bill suffered hearing damage from the bomb in the backpack laid at their feet. In the video, the backpack explodes 20 seconds after the man in the white hat walks away. Stephanie Douglas saw it in the FBI's Washington Command Center.
Nobody I've talked to can quite find the words.
It's a horrible video to watch. I mean, after the bomb goes off, obviously it's a very smoky situation. There's a lot of smoke, and the smoke clears. And what you saw is a very happy scene of people watching that marathon is no longer that. Even after seeing something so horrible, I remember the survivor who, unfortunately, his clothes were on fire. And I just remember this police officer getting down on his hands and knees and putting out the flames on this person with his bare hands. And I just thought to myself, you know, what an incredible contrast of events. Something so horrific, and then we have this person with no thought or of his own comfort or consequences to himself rush in and actually do something like that. That was so brave. I still remember that very clearly.
Only 2 days had passed. Now they were looking for every image of the suspect they called White Hat. Massachusetts State Police analysts found him with a man in a black hat.
Which turned out to be his older brother.
Yes.
Now you have the Tsarnaev brothers.
Yes.
But you don't know that.
No, I don't know that. I don't know who they are.
Then, suddenly that Wednesday, confusion reigned when cable news channels erroneously reported that a suspect had been arrested and was headed to the courthouse. The error caused pandemonium, according to U.S. Attorney Carmen Ortiz, who's leading the prosecution.
And I remember turning to my colleague and saying to my press person, saying, "Do we have someone in custody?" And I turned to Rick, to Lori, "Do we have someone in custody?" And they were like, "No, we don't have anyone in custody." I think that kind of misinformation makes it appear as if government isn't in control. The investigation is sort of, you know, confusing. And so it can be very, very harmful.
More harm was done the next morning when the New York Post added to the erroneous reporting by putting a man with a white hat on its front page.
Only problem wasn't the right man in the white hat.
That generated tremendous risk and harm. It gives people a false sense of security, thinking, oh, they've identified these suspects, when it turns out that it's wrong individuals. It puts those individuals at tremendous risk.
The risk to the innocent lent urgency to the debate over whether to release the real pictures.
Why wouldn't you release the pictures to the public? Isn't that the fastest way to find the perpetrators?
Sure. But it also gives them every opportunity to escape. Remember, we do not have the identities of anybody.
So your concern was that if you put the pictures out there to the public, they'd know they'd been had and they'd run.
Yes, absolutely.
The countervailing argument is you had individuals, we had photographic evidence of individuals who we strongly believed were responsible for the bombings, and we needed to identify them as quickly as possible.
So, Thursday, Rick Delorier walked out in time for the evening news.
These images should be the only ones, and I emphasize the only ones, that the public should view to assist us.
The pictures set events in motion that Delorier didn't predict, in fact, didn't recognize, even after they started.
My wife was watching the news that evening,
An officer has been shot.
and there was a story about an MIT police officer who was subsequently identified as Officer Sean Collier, who had been murdered that evening and right on campus. My wife looked at me and she said, I bet those are your guys and they're on the run right now, and I bet they've murdered this police officer. And I didn't believe her. I said, oh, no, I don't think so. And I went to bed.
Your wife had cracked the case, and you went to bed.
I did not believe that she had cracked the case at the time. I went to bed.
I went to bed probably around 10 o'clock, and this is probably a sad commentary in my life, but my BlackBerry was on the pillow next to me.
And somewhere around 12:30, quarter to 1 in the morning, I received a phone call from one of my assistant special agents in charge, Jeff Sillett.
And my phone rang about a little after 1 in the morning.
I woke her out of a sound sleep, and I said, an MIT police officer has been murdered earlier this evening by individuals we believe to be responsible for the bombing, and they are on the streets of Watertown right now engaged in a shootout with the Watertown Police Department.
It was combat. 2 suspects threw pipe bombs and a pressure cooker bomb at the police. An officer was gravely wounded. Those who argued that releasing the pictures would cause the suspects to run were right.
Was putting the pictures out the right call?
Yes, I think at the end of the day, we really had no choice. Believe me, the death of Sean Collier is not lost on the FBI. We consider it an incredibly tragic event. But I think at the end of the day, given the facts as we knew them at the time, we made the best decision.
How do you feel about that decision now?
I stand by that decision, Scott. Nobody could have reasonably foreseen that a police officer would be murdered. What could reasonably be foreseen is that these individuals could have had more bombs, could have set those bombs off, and caused carnage similar or even greater to what they caused on April 15th.
One suspect was killed, the other vanished. In minutes, the FBI matched the dead man's fingerprints to Tamerlan Tsarnaev, an immigrant from Kyrgyzstan. Other records showed he had a brother.
Yeah, and I remember that so clearly. Somebody walking in with a manila folder and said, okay, here's his brother, and they opened it, and it's this picture, and I go, that's him, that's White Hat. That's who we should be looking for.
Friday, the governor ordered a lockdown of Boston, but a house-to-house search turned up nothing.
Everybody's exhausted and deflated. You know, I mean, it's a very sad day for Boston, another sad day for Boston.
But then, a man noticed someone in a boat in his backyard. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was wounded but alive.
What did you think as he went into court to be arraigned?
He had a smug grin on his face much of the time in the courtroom. He would glance over his right shoulder back to his relatives and smile and smirk at them. And I found that absolutely galling, and I found it reprehensible.
The Attorney General has decided to seek the death penalty in this case.
Yes, he has. And I support that decision.
Dzhokhar Tsarnaev has pled not guilty. His defense team declined to speak with us. U.S. Attorney Carmen Ortiz is preparing for a November trial.
The notorious narco known as El Chapo has achieved one of his greatest aspirations. He's the most famous drug lord of all time. This is our 4th 60-minute story about El Chapo, whose real name is Joaquin Guzmán. Our first story came when he was captured after 13 years on the run. We told you then that El Chapo, Spanish for Shorty, was on Forbes' list of billionaires and had earned an outsized reputation for his worldwide smuggling empire, his ruthless brutality, and most of all for his daring getaways, like the one we told you about last year, when he vanished from a maximum security Mexican prison through one of his trademark escape tunnels. Then there was our interview with actor Sean Penn, who met Guzmán at a hideaway last fall. After El Chapo's stunning prison break, many thought he'd never get caught again. But he was. How? You're about to see. Where in the pantheon of drug traffickers, drug lords, does El Chapo fall?
El Chapo resides at the very top of that hierarchy.
Peter Vincent was a senior official and legal advisor of both the Justice Department and Homeland Security during the international manhunt for Guzmán. He says after the daring escape last summer, El Chapo became almost delusional. So what precipitated his downfall?
He became drunk on his own wine. He started to believe the hype that he was special, that he was almost a demigod, that he was something truly magical. And he became so incredibly arrogant that he thought he was untouchable.
Jim Dinkins agrees. As chief of Homeland Security investigations, he was part of the U.S.-Mexico task force that nabbed El Chapo in 2014.
He knew how he was captured last time. And so he had the upper hand, right? He had all the cards in his hand to go off into the sunset and to learn from his mistake. But he just couldn't help himself. And he remained in the public eye.
After his first escape from prison in 2001, Guzmán virtually disappeared from sight for 13 years. But not this time.
Here he gets out of prison and he's on the road being spotted at this place having, drinks, and this place, with his family members.
He invited Sean Penn and the actress Kate Del Castillo to come in to see him.
Yeah.
Did Mexican law enforcement know that these two actors were going in to see El Chapo?
Oh, absolutely. They knew where Sean was going to go, when he was going to land. They knew right away.
How did they know? Because they were listening in on the cartel's communications and watching. Mexican and U.S. law enforcement reformed the task force that caught El Chapo the last time. They were tracking not just Guzmán, but everyone in his inner circle, including his cook, and everyone his lieutenants contacted, including Sean Penn. Did it become sloppy?
Definitely. There was more sightings of him in the last 6 months than there was in the last 10 years before he was captured in 2014.
After he escaped the last time, you told us that you were not confident that he would ever be captured again.
Yeah.
That El Chapo had become a smarter criminal.
Yeah.
Did you overestimate his intelligence?
I truly did. Here he had over a year in prison. I presumed he was using that same amount of time to think about how he was going to remain a fugitive for the rest of his life.
Mexican officials told us that only 20 days after his escape, the Marines had picked up on Guzmán's trail.
They created an even smaller team of Mexican Marines, a search block, and they focused on the prize at hand, and that was capturing El Chapo Guzmán alive if they absolutely could.
Their first opportunity came in early October, just days after Sean Penn's visit. The Marines told us they waited because they didn't want the American actor caught in the crossfire. A team of Marines approached one of El Chapo's mountaintop ranches by Jungle Road, while another group of commandos flew in by helicopter. So what went wrong on that October mission?
As I understand it, despite all of El Chapo Guzmán's bravado of being a macho, very powerful man, he was running with a child in his arms.
A human shield, a baby as a shield?
That's the only way that one can rationally see it.
So once again, El Chapo got away. In early December, intelligence led the Marines to this house in the sleepy coastal town of Los Mochis in northern Sinaloa. Wiretap intercepts talked about a visit planned by Grandma and Aunt, code names for El Chapo and his lieutenant, known as Cholo Ivan. The Marines watched the house for a month as painters and construction crews came and went. Then, on the morning of Thursday, January 7th, Grandma finally showed up. An assault force quickly moved into position nearby. That evening, someone in the house called out for a large order of tacos, and this armored truck left to go pick up the food. Chapo was having a party.
For an incredibly savvy, clever almost a criminal genius that El Chapo Guzmán was. He ultimately was done in by very simple tastes.
What do you mean?
Tacos, tequila, and chicas.
At 4:40 a.m., in the pre-dawn hours of Friday, January 8th, the Marines began battering down the gate of Chapo's safe house. We've concealed the identities of the commando leaders for their safety.
Nosotros intentamos abrir la puerta.
So when we first knocked on the door of the house, the shooting started.
A fierce gun battle erupted. The first Marine through the door was shot in the arm. I watched the videotape. It's very intense.
Los elementos de seguridad de Chapo.
Chapo's people inside the house were firing high-caliber rounds, grenades, so it was like a war zone.
The Marines moved methodically through the house. Chapo's henchmen retreated up the stairs. Just inside the door, one gunman lay dead. Down the hall, 4 more taken prisoner, and the commandos quickly check a walk-in closet covered with full-length mirrors. Upstairs, the Marines find 2 women, one of them the cook, cowering on the bathroom floor. Outside the house, more commandos fought it out with gunmen who fled across the rooftops. When it was over, there were 5 cartel members dead and 6 in custody. But once again, Chapo, with Cholo Ivan, had vanished. A couple of days later, the Marines took us to the safe house in Los Moches in an armed convoy. Here, just inside the gate, a pool of blood where the Marine was shot. Sangre, blood. And inside the door, more bloodstains. The walls pockmarked with bullet holes and the scars of exploding shrapnel. And remember that walk-in closet? The mirrors masked a hidden door. Behind the secret door, the entrance to one of El Chapo's trademark tunnels. It's connected to a network of storm drains and sewers. It was 45 minutes before they found El Chapo's escape route. That morning, the Marines gave chase.
We intensified the search inside the tunnels, opening manhole covers and inserting people into the sewers.
Then it started raining, hard.
Después de 20 minutos de lluvia aproximadamente.
After 20 minutes of rain, we thought that Chapo might drown in the sewers because of the high level of the water.
So he popped up out of a manhole right in the middle of a busy street.
Tal parece que no tuvo otra opción.
That was his only option.
So this is where he came out. He popped out of this manhole cover, which is about a half mile from the house, straight down the road there. Look carefully at the security camera footage from the gas station across the street. At 8:55 a.m., 4 hours after the first shots were exchanged, right there, you can see Chapo and Cholo Ivan climbing out of the sewer. And then in this cell phone video, you can see them carjack a white VW Jetta and speed away. The fugitives got only 3 blocks before the Jetta broke down. So they jacked a second car, a red Ford Focus. But only a couple of miles out of town, that car broke down. Within minutes, the Federal Emergency Center got 2 reports of hijacked vehicles. On the highway out of town, the Marines found the Ford already on the bed of a tow truck, but no sign of Chapo and his lieutenant. They had been picked up by the federal police and taken to a nearby motel. What were they doing in the back seat of the police car?
No hablaban.
They weren't talking. They were relaxed, but they looked confused.
No one knows why the federal police took Chapo to the motel instead of to jail, but Peter Vincent has a theory.
El Chapo undoubtedly said, 1, you let me go now, and I will make you wealthier beyond your wild imaginations. If you should choose to decline my most generous offer, I am not only going to kill you, but I am going to rape and kill your wife and your daughters, and I'm going to torture your sons.
He has behaved like that in the past.
He has behaved like that virtually his entire criminal career.
Bribes and threats.
Bribes and threats. Bribes and bullets. Luckily, the Mexican Marines showed up, realized what was going on, and took control of the situation.
Chapo was flown to Mexico City for booking. He was paraded before reporters and returned to Altiplano, the same prison from which he had escaped last July.
This time, he is rotated from cell to cell to cell. Guards are circulated every 15 minutes through whatever cell he happens to be occupying on that particular day.
The U.S. Justice Department wants Guzmán extradited, brought here to face charges for his crimes. 7 separate jurisdictions, including New York, Chicago, and San Diego, all want to put El Chapo on trial. Juan Pedro Badillo is a lawyer who only has one client, El Chapo. He warns extradition can be a lengthy process.
How long do you think the whole extradition legal proceedings will go on?
10, 15, 20 years perhaps. Or it could be 1 or 2 years.
El Chapo Guzmán knows that if he is ultimately extradited to the United States, it's essentially game over for him.
Soon after Chapo's arrest, the U.S.-Mexico task force captured another 24 Sinaloa cartel members.
It sends an incredibly powerful message to current kingpins, to future narco-traffickers, that you may run, you may hide, but ultimately, this multinational force will track you down from the highest mountains or the deepest, darkest jungles or through the stinking sewers of towns and cities anywhere in the world and bring you to justice.
Charlie and Carol Gaskos were an elderly couple who moved to Santa Monica, California, sometime in early 1997 to begin a new phase of their life. For the next 14 years, they did almost nothing that was memorable, and they would be of absolutely no interest if it weren't for the fact that Charlie Gaskos turned out to be James Whitey Bulger, the notorious Boston gangster and longtime fugitive who's just beginning to serve 2 lifetime sentences. Carol Gaskos was actually Catherine Gregg, Whitey's longtime girlfriend and caregiver. The story of how they managed to elude an international manhunt for so long while hiding in plain sight is interesting. And tonight you'll hear it from the Gaskos neighbors, and for the first time, from the federal agents who finally unraveled the case with the help of a boob job and an alley cat.
If you're forced into retirement with a comfortable nest egg and a desire to be left completely alone, there is no better place than Santa Monica, California. This low-key seaside suburb of LA is shared by transients and tourists, hippies and hedonists, celebrities, and lots of senior citizens attracted to the climate and an abundance of inexpensive rent-controlled apartments just a few blocks from the ocean. Places like the Princess Eugenia on 3rd Street, which is where Charlie and Carol Gaskos, a childless couple from Chicago, lived for 14 years without attracting much attention from longtime neighbors or landlords. Josh Bond is the building manager.
What were they like? They were like the nice, retired old couple that lived in the apartment next to me.
Good tenants?
Excellent tenants. Never complained, always paid rent on time.
In cash?
In cash.
Janice Goodwin lived down the hall.
They had nothing, and they never went out. They'd never had food delivered. She never dressed nicely.
You thought they were poor?
Yes, without a doubt.
The one thing everyone remembers about the Gaskos is that they loved animals and always made a fuss over the ones in the neighborhood. Barbara Gluck remembers that Carol Gaskos always fed a stray cat after its owner had died.
She would, you know, pet it and be sweet to it, and then she would put a plate of food, like, out here.
Mm-hmm. And she liked the cat?
Obviously. She loved the cat. And we all liked the cat, but she was taking care of the cat.
And what about Charlie Gaskos?
You know, he always had a hat on and dark glasses. I have to say, it was mysterious to me why a lovely woman like that was hanging out with that guy, that old grumpy man. I never could figure that one out until I heard they had $800,000 something in the wall. And then I went, oh, okay, you know.
Money wasn't the only thing found in the Gaskos' apartment on June 22, 2011, when the FBI stopped by and ended what it called the most extensive manhunt in the Bureau's history.
Weapons all over the apartment. I mean, weapons by his nightstand, weapons under the windowsill, shotguns, mini Rugers, rifles.
Loaded,
ready to go.
What had started out as a routine day for Special Agent Scott Garriola, who was in charge of hunting fugitives in L.A., would turn into one of the most interesting days of his career. After getting a call to stake out a building in Santa Monica, he notified his backup team with the LAPD.
I had 4 guys working that day, and they said, "We got a tip on Whitey Bulger, and I'll see you there in about an hour." And invariably, the text will return, "Who's Whitey Bulger?"
Really?
A few of them, I had to gently remind him who Whitey Bulger was.
That he was number 1 on the FBI's most wanted list.
Number one, yeah. Big East Coast figure, but in the West Coast, not so much.
Mention any cartel leader.
The cops in L.A. were focused on gangbangers and cartel members, not some retired Irish mobster who hadn't been spotted in 16 years. But then few mobsters have ever been as infamous in a city as Whitey Bulger was in Boston, and his reputation was for more than just being grumpy. Besides extortion and flooding the city with cocaine, Bulger routinely performed or ordered executions, some at close range, some with a hail of bullets, and at least one by strangulation, after which it's said he took a nap. Special Agent Rich Tian, who ran the FBI's Whitey Bulger Fugitive Task Force, had heard it all.
Bulger was charged with 19 counts of murder. He was charged with other crimes. He was a scourge to the society in South Boston, his own community.
He was also a scourge to the FBI and a great source of embarrassment to Tian, Special Agent Phil Torsney, and others on the FBI task force. Years earlier, Whitey Bulger had infiltrated the Boston office of the FBI and bought off agents who protected him and plied him with information, including the tip that allowed Bulger to flee just days before he was to be indicted.
We really had to catch this guy to establish credibility after all the other issues, and it was just a matter of bringing this guy back to Boston to make sure this guy didn't die or get away with this thing.
Torsney, who's now retired, and Agent Tommy McDonald joined the task force in 2009. The joke was Bulger was on the FBI's least wanted list. There hadn't been a credible lead in more than a decade, and their efforts in Bulger's old neighborhood of South Boston were met with mistrust and ridicule.
Some people, they told us right out front, "You guys aren't looking for that guy." People just made the assumption we had him stashed somewhere. I mean, people really thought that kind of thing.
Despite that mindset that we're not going to help you, the FBI still got it done.
Took 16 years.
Took 16 years. Yeah, this was not a typical fugitive.
The FBI says Bulger had planned his getaway years in advance, with money set aside and a fake identity for a Thomas Baxter. During his first 2 years on the lam, Bulger was in touch with friends and family, shuttling between New York, Chicago, and the resort town of Grand Isle, Louisiana, where he rented a home until his identity was compromised. After that, it seemed as if Bulger had disappeared from the face of the earth, except for the alleged sightings all over the world.
How many of these tips do you think might have been true?
Boy, there was thousands and thousands of tips, and I don't think any of them were true.
One of the obstacles was there were really no good photographs of Bulger or his longtime live-in girlfriend, Catherine Gregg, a former dental hygienist. The FBI often noted that the couple shared a love of animals, especially dogs and cats, and asked veterinarians to be on the lookout. There were reports that Gregg once had breast implants and other plastic surgery in Boston, so the task force reached out to physicians. Eventually, they got a call from a Dr. Matthias Donnellan, who had located her files in storage.
I was trying to leave the office a little early to catch one of my kids' ball games, and I said, well, listen, I'm going to swing by in the morning and pick those up. And they said to me, do you want the photos too? And I said, you have photos? And they said, yeah, we have photos. And I said, we'll be there in 15 minutes.
The breast implant lead produced a treasure trove of high-resolution Catherine Gregg photographs that would help crack the case. The FBI decided to switch strategies, going after the girlfriend in order to catch the gangster.
This is an announcement by the FBI.
The FBI created this public service announcement.
60-year-old Grieg is the girlfriend of 81-year-old Bulger.
It ran in 14 markets on daytime talk shows aimed at women.
Call the tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI.
And it didn't take long. The very next morning, the Bulger task force got 3 messages from someone that used to live in Santa Monica and was 100% certain that Charlie and Carol Gaskos, apartment 303 at the Princess Eugenia Apartments, were the people they were looking for. The descriptions and the age difference matched, and Deputy U.S. Marshal Neil Sullivan, who handled the lead, said there was another piece of tantalizing information.
The tipster specifically described that they were caring for this cat and their love for this cat. So that was just one piece of the puzzle on the tip that just added up to saying, if this isn't them, it's something we better check out immediately because it sure sounds like them.
A search of the FBI's computer database for the Gaskos raised another red flag, not for what it found, but for what it didn't.
Basically, like they were ghosts.
No driver's license.
Exactly. No driver's license, no California ID, like they didn't exist.
That's the apartment.
That corner on the 3rd floor.
On the right-hand side?
Yep.
By early afternoon, FBI agent Scott Garriola had set up a number of surveillance posts and had already met with apartment manager Josh Bond to talk about his tenants.
He closed the door, threw down a folder, and opened it up and said, "Are these the people that live in apartment 303?
Did you say anything when you saw the pictures?
My initial reaction was, holy
You're living next door to a gangster.
Well, I still didn't really know who he was.
But it didn't take him long to figure it out. While the FBI was mulling its options, Bond logged on to Bulger's Wikipedia page.
I'm just kind of scrolling down, and it's like, oh, wow, this guy's serious. It's like murders and extortion, and then I get to the bottom, and there's this thing. It's like from one of his old people saying, well, the last time I saw him, he said, you know, when he goes out, he's going to have guns, and he's going to be ready to take people with him. I was like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't be involved in this.
I mean, we were sitting here laughing about it, but he's a pretty serious guy.
Yeah.
He killed a lot of people,
True.
or had them killed.
I didn't know that at the time.
Bond told the FBI he wasn't going to knock on the Gaskos' door because there was a note posted expressly asking people not to bother them. Carol had told neighbors that Charlie was showing signs of dementia.
So we were back there.
So Garriola devised a ruse involving the Gaskos' storage locker in the garage.
It had the name Gaskos across it, and apartment 303.
He had the manager called to tell them that their locker had been broken into and that he needed someone to come down to see if anything was missing. Carol Gaskos said her husband would be right down.
We just rushed him.
You mean guns out, FBI,
Sure.
don't move?
Gave the words, hey, FBI, get your hands up. And hands went up right away. And then at that moment, we told him to get down on his knees, and he gave us, I ain't getting down on my effing knees.
Didn't want to get his pants dirty.
Didn't want to get his pants dirty. You know, wearing white and seeing the oil on the ground, I guess he didn't want to get down in oil.
Even at 81, this was a man used to being in control.
I asked him to identify himself, and that didn't go over well. He asked me to effing identify myself, which I did. And I asked him, I said, are you Whitey Bulger? He said, yes. Just about that moment, someone catches my attention from a few feet away by the elevator shaft.
It was Janice Goodwin from the 3rd floor coming to do her laundry.
And I said, excuse me, I think I can help you. This man has dementia, so if he's acting oddly, you know, that could be why.
Immediately what flashed through my mind is, oh my God, I just arrested an 81-year-old man with Alzheimer's who thinks he's Whitey Bulger. What is he going to tell me next? He's Elvis? So I said, do me a favor. I said, this woman over here says you have a touch of Alzheimer's. He said, don't listen to her. She's effing nuts. He says, I'm James Bulger.
A few minutes later, he confirmed it, signing a consent form allowing the FBI to search his apartment.
As he's signing, he says, that's the first time I've signed that name in a long time.
There was a feeling of resignation.
I don't think he had it. I did ask him, I said, hey, Whitey, I said, aren't you relieved that you don't have to look over your shoulder anymore and you know, it's come to an end? And he said, are you nuts?
But in some ways, Whitey Bulger and Catherine Gregg had already been prisoners in apartment 303, which appeared to be a mixture of the murderous and the mundane. Alongside the weapons and all the money, they had stockpiled a lifetime supply of cleansers, creams, and detergents. The FBI took special interest in a collection of 64-ounce bottles with white socks stretched over the top.
I said, hey, Whitey, what are these? Are these some kind of Molotov cocktail you're making? He goes, no. He said, I buy tube socks from the 99-cent store, and they're too tight on my calves. That's the way I stretch them out. I said, why are you shopping at the 99-cent store? You have $500,000 under your bed. He goes, I had to make the money last.
It's been said that one of the reasons it took so long to catch Whitey Bulger is that people were looking for a gangster, and Bulger, whether he liked it or not, had ceased to be one.
He said it was hard to keep up that mindset of a criminal, and that's part of the reason he came down to that garage. He said if he was on his game, 15, 20, 30 years ago, he probably would have sensed something there. But he said it was hard to stay on that edge, that criminal edge, after being on the lam as a regular citizen for 15 years.
The master manipulator gave credit to Catherine Gregg for keeping him crime-free, hoping it would mitigate her sentence. She's now serving 8 years for harboring a fugitive. On the long plane ride back to Boston, Bulger told his captors that he became obsessed with not getting caught and would do anything to avoid it, even if it meant obeying the law. Whitey Bulger's biggest fear, they said, was being discovered dead in his apartment, and he had a plan to avoid it.
If he became ill and knew he was on his deathbed, he'd go down to Arizona, crawl down the bottom of one of these mines and die and decompose and hope that we would never find him and still be looking for him forever.
Shortly after 9/11, the Pentagon ordered a top-secret team of American commandos into Afghanistan with a single, simple order: kill Osama bin Laden. It was America's best chance to eliminate the leader of al-Qaeda. The inside story of exactly what happened in that mission and how close it came to its objective has never been told until tonight. The man you're about to meet was the officer in command, leading a team from the U.S. Army's mysterious Delta Force, a unit so secret it's often said that Delta doesn't exist. But you're about to see Delta's operators in action. Why would the mission commander break his silence after 7 years? He told us that most everything he's read in the media about his mission is wrong, and tonight he wants to set the record straight.
Our job is to go find him, capture or kill him. And we knew the writing on the wall was really to kill him. No one wanted to bring Osama bin Laden back to stand trial in the United States somewhere.
In 2001, just 10 weeks after 9/11, he was a 37-year-old Army major leading a team of America's most elite commandos. Even now, we can't tell you his name or show you his face. We hired a theatrical makeup artist to take the former Delta officer through a series of transformations to create the man you see now. He calls himself Dalton Fury. He's the author of Kill Bin Laden, a new book out this week. Dalton Fury is used to disguises. In fact, in 2001, his entire team transformed itself in Afghanistan.
Everybody has their beard grown. Everybody's wearing local Afghan clothing, sometimes carrying the same weapons as them.
The idea was that if this all worked out, Osama bin Laden would be dead and no one would ever know that Delta Force was there.
That's right. That's the plan. And that always is when you're talking about Delta Force.
And there was no mission more important to the United States.
We'll smoke him out of his cave. And we'll get him eventually.
But the administration's strategy was to let Afghans do most of the fighting. Using radio intercepts and other intelligence, the CIA pinpointed bin Laden in the mountains near the border of Pakistan. Following the strategy of keeping an Afghan face on the war, Fury's Delta team joined the CIA and Afghan fighters and piled into pickup trucks. They videotaped their journey to a place called Tora Bora. Fury told us his orders were to kill bin Laden and leave the body with the Afghans.
Right here, you're looking at basically the battlefield from the last location that we had firm on Osama bin Laden's location.
This ridge line is at about 14,000 feet, and back this way toward me is Pakistan.
That's right.
On a scale of, say, 1 to 10, 10 being the toughest, how tough a position is this to attack?
In my experience, it's a 10.
Delta developed an audacious plan to come at bin Laden from the one direction he would never expect.
We want to come in on the back door.
You were going to come up over the tops of the peaks?
That's right. The original plan that we sent up to our higher headquarters, Delta Force wants to come in over the mountain with oxygen, coming from the Pakistan side, over the mountains and come in and get a drop on bin Laden from behind.
Why didn't you do that?
Disapproved at some level above us. Whether that was Central Command or all the way up to the President of the United States, I'm not sure.
The next option Delta wanted to employ was to drop hundreds of landmines in the mountain passes that led to Pakistan, bin Laden's escape route.
First guy blows his leg off, everybody else stops. That allows aircraft overhead to find them. They see all these heat sources out there. Okay, there's a big, large group of Al-Qaeda moving south. They can engage that.
Why didn't you do that?
Disapproved.
Why was it not approved?
I have no idea.
How often does Delta come up with a tactical plan that's disapproved by higher headquarters?
In my experience, in my 5 years at Delta, never before.
The military wouldn't tell us who rejected the plans or why. Fury wasn't happy about it, but he pressed on with the only option he had left, a frontal assault on bin Laden's dug-in al-Qaeda fighters. The Delta team had only about 50 men, so the mission would depend on the Afghan militia as guides and muscle. Their leader was a warlord, a self-styled general named Ali.
Ali told us, after about 30 seconds of discussion, he kind of listened to me ramble on, and then the first thing he said was, I don't think you guys can handle it. You can't handle Al-Qaeda in these mountains.
Ali, second from the left, met with this CIA officer and accepted millions of dollars in cash from the agency. In short order, his Mujahideen fighters were escorting Delta Force into the mountains. Paint the picture for me of these Afghan Mujahideen troops.
They ranged anywhere from maybe 14 up to maybe 80. Various dress, basically we would probably consider it rags, which is the standard dress for a Mujahideen warrior.
This is video of the top-secret mission never seen by the public before. It was recorded by the Delta commandos themselves. Dressed like Afghans, the Americans maneuvered up the mountains, calling in airstrikes on al-Qaeda. By day they would advance, but at night they soon discovered that their Afghan allies went home. Well, I have to assume that if you started up the hills of Tora Bora and the Mujahideen took territory, they didn't abandon that at night.
Oh, yes, they did.
They gave it up to the enemy?
Absolutely. The Mujahideen would go up, get into a skirmish, a firefight, lose a guy or two, maybe kill an al-Qaeda guy or two, and then they'd leave. It was almost like it was an agreement and understanding between the two forces fighting each other. Almost put on a good show and then leave.
4 days after arriving in Tora Bora, Dalton Fury was faced with a fateful command decision. 3 of his men were in trouble behind enemy lines, and at the same time, the CIA had been listening to bin Laden's radio transmissions and had a breakthrough.
And this is where it gets complicated. At about the same time, the CIA, George, comes into our room and he says, guys, I got a location for Osama bin Laden. That's probably the best locational data we've had on Osama bin Laden ever.
It was night, so Fury was without his Afghan allies. Still, he managed to rescue his men and then found himself approaching bin Laden's doorstep.
We're about 2,000 meters away from where we think bin Laden's at still, from where we're at. Now we have to make a decision.
Fury had 2 choices: advance his small team with no Afghan support or return to camp and assault in the morning. He was under orders to make the Afghans take the lead, and intelligence said there were more than 1,000 hardened fighters protecting bin Laden. You write in the book, my decision to abort that effort to kill or capture bin Laden when we might have been within 2,000 meters of him, about 2,000 yards, still bothers me. It leaves me with a feeling of somehow letting down our nation at a critical time.
That's correct.
Why do you feel that way?
Had we gone up that ridgeline towards that location, Osama bin Laden might have been 500 meters away. We might have run right into him. So there's always that doubt that we might have run into him. We also might have got up there and found nothing. It wasn't worth the risk at that particular moment to go up there and play cowboy. It was better to be cautious refit, go up there with the entire force the next day, and play the battle out as we had planned.
In the morning, bin Laden was on the radio. The CIA, Delta, and their Afghan allies were listening.
How did the Afghans react when they heard from Osama bin Laden on the radio?
Osama bin Laden is many a Muslim's hero. These guys, in my opinion, were more in awe of Osama bin Laden than they were willing to kill him. When they heard him talking on the radio, they would gather around the individual that held that handheld transistor. He would hold it up in the air, almost as if he didn't want the connection to break. Almost like they could see the ridgeline Osama bin Laden happened to be talking from, like they could almost see him and feel his presence. And they just stood there with wide eyes and somewhat in awe that here is the leader of the jihad, the leader of Al-Qaeda, and they're actually hearing his voice over the radio.
And these were the men who were supposed to help you capture or kill him. Some allies.
Some were better than others.
The radio intercepts gave Delta a fix on bin Laden's location, and one of the Delta's soldiers narrated his own video.
This top hill, the very top up there, that's supposedly where bin Laden's hanging out. We've seen movement along this saddle right here. We don't know if it's friendly or not, so we haven't been able to call fire on it.
And then something extraordinary happened. Fury's Afghan allies announced that they had negotiated a ceasefire with Al-Qaeda, something the Americans had no interest in. When Fury's team advanced anyway, his Afghan partners drew their weapons on Delta. It took 12 hours to end the bogus ceasefire, precious time for Al-Qaeda to move.
So we think he's moved over here.
So Osama bin Laden starts here, as far as we know, and he's coming all the way around. Now he's doubled back. You got to figure he's heading for the valley and the pass into Pakistan.
Our assumption is he's going for the valley at that time.
Bin Laden had changed direction and the tone of his radio calls.
Clearly under duress, clearly hurting, clearly caring for his men.
Inside this building, the American team listened to bin Laden on the radio. Fury wrote down the translation in a notebook.
Quote, "Our prayers were not answered. Times are dire and bad. We did not get support from the apostates who are our brothers. I'm sorry for bringing you here. It is okay to surrender," end quote.
When you heard that, what did you think?
I thought it's almost over.
Soon after that intercept, a Delta team called Jackal radioed that they had bin Laden's entourage in sight.
The operators from Jackal team observed 50 men moving into a cave that they hadn't seen before. The Mujahideen said they saw an individual, a taller fellow, wearing a camouflage jacket. Everybody put two and two together. Okay, that's got to be Osama bin Laden egressing from the battlefield. They called up every available bomber in the air, took control of the airspace, and they dropped several hours of bombs on the cave he went into. We believe, it was our opinion at the time, that he died inside that cave.
Bin Laden's radio went silent, and Dalton Fury believed that the bombs had killed him. 6 months later, American and Canadian forces came back for proof. They checked Al-Qaeda fighting holes and used explosives to try to open up collapsed caves. This is where they hoped to find bin Laden's body. It's an Al-Qaeda graveyard rising from the opium poppies. The troops dug up bodies and removed the fingers for forensic analysis, but there was no luck. In October 2004, bin Laden released a message, and Fury knew that his team had failed. Today, based on intelligence, Fury believes he knows what happened. He says that bin Laden was wounded in the shoulder by shrapnel from an American bomb and was then hidden in this town next to the Al-Qaeda cemetery.
We believe a gentleman brought him in, a gentleman who him and his family were supporting Al-Qaeda during the battle. They were providing food, ammo, water. We think he went to that house, received medical attention for a few days, and then we believe they put him in a vehicle, moved him back across the pass.
This is the trail bin Laden would have used to escape.
It's my understanding they believe he got into a vehicle, he moved as far as he could, and then got out and walked across, or was carried across the pass into Pakistan, free and clear. When this is all over and this all dies down, and once we finally do grab Osama bin Laden, I think the fact that we lost him in Tora Bora will move out of my memory, so to speak. And I'm looking forward to those days.